And then, you need to have documentation when you're making the decisions.
Mm,
Uh, why did we approve or reject the risk? What was the criteria that we were looking at? What were the decision makers thinking about at the time? And one of the things that I found, and I'd be curious what your thoughts were just watching them,
hmm
is I would be going through this on a real-time basis, and maybe there wasn't enough information, or maybe I'd want us to do some more things. And I'll say, look, I'll conditionally accept it, but I'd like X, Y, and Z to be done, over a period of time, and I'd have to put in a date when I wanted it done, and
right.
then those would be tracked, and eventually they would come back to me and say, okay, has your condition been met or not? And I would have to personally sign off on it. But that gave us a lot of transparency.
Right.
But it also gave us some ability not to be overly disruptive in our approval process. If the only choice I had was to close the account because for whatever reason, we didn't have enough information at the time I was approving it, that would have been horribly disruptive to our customer and quite frankly to the global payment system. So, you needed to be practical about it. But the other thing is on the documentation, it was really important to me to be transparent on what I was thinking and why. And that transparency was a little bit controversial. There were some people saying, geez, Tom, like, some of the things you're saying, like, what if an examiner thought about it and, saw this? And it was like, well, if an examiner thought about it, it shows that we're, legitimately asking the tough questions and getting the tough
Right.
answers. And, if they disagree with me, I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. But more importantly, the decision-making process is about the decision makers. We'll
Mm,
worry about the other stakeholders later, but the last thing I want to do is just to go through mere pageantry where we're doing boilerplate or data dump. So it was really important to me that there was transparency. And what I found actually was, you know, uh, the people that approved it after me, which is two of our senior business people, they really appreciated the level of transparency I had when I was doing it because I would almost always have some sort of comments about what stood out to me in a particular customer, either good or bad, or conditions. And I was told, that a lot of times they go and look at my comments before they'd read the memo, just because they wanted to see sort of what I was thinking about, and use that, to kind of help them, uh, place everything in context. It
yeah.
was our opportunity to, have a dialogue among ourselves because, we were all traveling and making these decisions. So we had to have some way to communicate. And, it
hmm
would not be unusual for, one of the senior business people to say, hey, Tom, I saw you made some comment about such and such a customer. Can you give me a little bit more context? Or, and I remember in one case, uh, the senior business person disagreed with me and he closed the account. And ironically, shortly after that, the owners of the bank were sanctioned by OFAC. I felt really glad that he disagreed with me. But there was enough transparency in there
Yeah.
that, he saw that maybe I was glossing over something that he thought was more, relevant. And quite frankly, he was 100% right. And I'm really glad
Yeah.
that he caught it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to your point on the conditional approvals, I think that only helped increasing the quality of decision at the end of the day.
Well, I hope so. And what I saw happening was if I was putting certain types of conditions in a particular market, let's say there was a market that I had concerns about with casinos, like
Mm,
in Philippines or something like that. Um, then all of a sudden that would find its way into the future memo. So uh, oftentimes I'd only do the conditions for the first few memos coming through, and then they would pick up, oh, well, Tom's going to approve this and he's going to ask the question. So we might as well deal with it ahead of the time. And so it was a good way to iteratively adjust you know, kind of our compliance calls and everything else. Uh,
Right.
the other
Yeah.
thing is, I absolutely did not want to be a rubber stamp. Uh, you know, I wanted to, uh, you know, I wanted people to understand why I was doing something, either good or bad, and kind of what the information was that we were relying on it. You know, like I said earlier, if you make a bad decision, all the documentation in the world is not going to help you. You're going to be judged by that decision. So anything you do in the approval process, whether it's documentation or conditions or that sort of thing, um, you know, ultimately will make your program better.
Sure.
Now, the one thing I will say about conditions, and we got into a jam early on, was we weren't being disciplined about having deadlines on them and tracking them.
Mm.
And then we realized that, and I think maybe our auditors realized it as well. And you know, then we got much more disciplined at tracking the conditions and reporting it out at the governance committee. So if people weren't meeting the conditions in a timely manner, we would self-disclose that in our governance
Yeah.
documents.